Spartacus and the Blacklist by Howard Fast. When I sat down to begin the long and difficult task of writing the first draft of Spartacus, it was well over 40 years ago. I had just been released from prison. I had worked out some of the book in my mind while still in prison, which was an excellent environment for the task. My crime then was that I had refused to turn over to the House Committee of Un-American Activities a list of supporters of the Joint Anti-Fascist Refugee Committee. With Francisco Franco's victory over the legally constituted Spanish Republic, thousands of Republican soldiers, supporters, and their families had fled across the Pyrenees to France, and many of them had settled in Toulouse, a large number of them sick or wounded. Their condition was desperate. A group of anti-fascists found the money to buy an old convent and turn it into a hospital. The Quakers' Relief agreed to operate the hospital, if we would raise the money for the continuing function of the hospital. At that time, there was tremendous support for the cause of Republican Spain among people of goodwill, many of them very prominent. It was the list of these people that we refused to turn over to the House Committee, and thereby all the members of the group were found in contempt and sent to prison. It was a bad time, the worst time that I and my good wife had ever lived through. The country was as close to a police state as it had ever been. J. Edgar Hoover, the chief of the FBI, took on the role of a petty dictator. The fear of Hoover and his file on thousands of liberals permeated the country. No one dared to vote and speak against our imprisonment. As I said, it was not the worst time to write a book like Spartacus. When the manuscript was finished, I sent it to Angus Cameron, then my publisher at Little, Brown and Company. He loved the book, and wrote that he would publish it with pride and pleasure. Then J. Edgar Hoover sent word to Little, Brown that they were not to publish the book. Angus Cameron resigned in protest, and after that the manuscript went to 7 other leading publishers. All of them refused to publish it. The last of the 7 was Doubleday, and after a meeting of the editorial board, George Hecht, head of the Doubleday chain of bookstores, walked out of the room in anger and disgust. He then telephoned me, saying that he had never seen such a display of cowardice as among the Doubleday editorial board, and he said that if I published the book myself, he would give me an order for 600 copies. I had never published a book myself, but there was support from the liberal community, and I went ahead, poured the little money we had into the job, and somehow it got done. To my amazement, it sold over 40,000 copies in hardcover, and several million more years later when the terror was over. It was translated into 56 languages, and finally, 10 years after I had written it, Kirk Douglas persuaded Universal Studios to turn it into a film. Through the years, the film has been enormously successful, still being played as I write this. I suppose that I owe something for it coming into being to my prison term. War and prison are difficult for a writer to approach without seeing something of it himself. I knew no Latin, so learning a good deal of Latin, most of which I have forgotten, was also part of the writing process. I never forget the past, and if my ordeal helped me to write Spartacus, I think it was well worth it. Howard Fast, Old Greenwich, Connecticut, March 1996. Spartacus by Howard Fast. Part 1. How Cassius Crassus journeyed along the high road from Rome to Capua in the month of May. Chapter 1. It is recorded that as early as the middle of the month of March, the high road from the eternal city Rome to the somewhat smaller but hardly less lovely town of Capua was opened to the public travel once again. But this is not to say that traffic upon this road immediately reverted to normal. For that matter, during the past 4 years, no road in the Republic had known the peaceful and prosperous flow of commerce and person which was to be expected on the Roman road. More or less of disturbance had been encountered everywhere, and it would not be incorrect to say that the road between Rome and Capua had become symbolic of this disturbance. It was well said that as the roads go, so does Rome go. If the roads know peace and prosperity, so does the city know it. The news was posted around the city that any free citizen having business in Capua might travel there to transact it, but for the time being travel for pleasure to that lovely resort was not encouraged. However, as time passed and sweet and gentle springtime settled down over the land of Italy, restrictions were lifted, and once again the fine buildings and splendid scenery of Capua called to the Romans. In addition to the natural attractions of the Campania countryside, those who enjoyed fine perfume yet balked at inflated prices found profit as well as pleasure in Capua. There were situated the great perfume factories unequaled in the whole world, and to Capua were shipped the rare essences and oils from all over the earth, exotic and exquisite scents, Egyptian oil of roses, the essence of the lilies of Sheba, the poppies of Galilee, oils of ambergris, and of the rind of lemon and orange, the leaf of sage and mint, rosewood and sandalwood, and so forth and so on almost without end. Perfume at Capua could be purchased at less than half the price asked in Rome, and when one considers the growing population of scents in that time, for men as well as for women, and the necessity for them as well, one can understand that a trip to Capua for that, if for no other reason, might well be undertaken. Chapter 2. The road was opened in March, and 2 months later, in the middle of May, Caius Crassus and his sister Helena, and her friend Claudia Marius, set off to spend a week with relatives in Capua. They left Rome on the morning of a bright, clear, and cool day, a perfect day for travel, all of them young and bright-eyed and full of delight in the trip and in adventures which would certainly befall them. Caius Crassus, a young man of 25, whose dark hair fell in abundant and soft ringlets, and whose regular features had given him a reputation for good looks as well as good birth, rode a beautiful white Arabian horse, a birthday present from his father the year before, and the 2 girls traveled in open litters. Each litter was carried by 4 slaves, who were road-broken, and who could do 10 miles at a smooth run without resting. They planned to spend 5 days on the road, putting up each evening at the country villa of a friend or relative, and this way, by easy and pleasant stages, to come to Capua. They knew before they started that the road was tokened with punishment, but they didn't think it would be enough to disturb them. As a matter of fact, the girls were quite excited by the descriptions they had heard, and as for Caius, he always had a pleasant and somewhat sensuous reaction to such things, and he was also proud of his stomach and of the fact that such sights did not inordinately disturb him. After all, he reasoned with the girls, it is better to look at a crucifix than to be on one. "We shall look straight ahead," Helena said. She was better looking than Claudia, who was blonde but listless, pale skin and pale eyes, and an air of fatigue which she nurtured. Her body was full and attractive, but Caius found her rather stupid and wondered what his sister saw in her. A problem he was determined to solve on this trip. He had several times before resolved to seduce his sister's friend, and always the resolution had broken down before her listless disinterest, a disinterest not specific in terms of himself, but general. She was bored, and Caius was certain that only her boredom prevented her from being utterly boring. His sister was something else. His sister excited him in a fashion that troubled him. She was as tall as he, very similar to him in appearance, better looking if anything, and considered beautiful by men who were not fended away by her purpose and strength. His sister excited him, and he was conscious that in planning this trip to Capua, he hoped for some resolution of this excitement. His sister and Claudia made an odd but satisfying combination, and Caius looked forward to rewarding incidents on the journey. A few miles outside of Rome, the tokens of punishment began. There was a place where the road crossed a little wasteland of rock and sand, a few acres in extent, and the person in charge of the exhibit had, with an eye for effect, chosen this particular spot for the first crucifix. The cross had been cut out of fresh new wood, pitch-bleeding pine, and since the ground fell away behind it, it stood stark and bare and angular against the morning sky, so huge and impressive, over-large since it was first, that one hardly noticed the naked body of the man who hung upon it. It stood slightly askew, as is so often the case with the top-heavy crucifix, and this added to its bizarre, demi-human quality. Caius drew up his horse, and then walked the animal toward the crucifix, and with a little flick of her courtesy quirt, Helena ordered the litter slaves to follow. "May we rest, O mistress," whispered the pace-setter of Helena's litter, when they came to a halt before the crucifix. He was a Spaniard, and his Latin was broken and wary. "Of course," said Helena. She was only 23, but already of strong opinion, as all the women of her family were, and she despised senseless cruelty toward animals, whether slave or beast. Then the litter-bearers gently lowered the carriages, squatting gratefully beside them. A few yards in front of the crucifix, on a straw chair shaded by a small patched awning, sat a fat, amiable man of distinction and poverty. His distinction was manifest in each of his several chins, and in the dignity of his huge paunch, and his poverty, not unmixed with sloth, was plainly evident by his poor and dirty clothes, his grimly fingernails, and his stubble of beard. His amiability was the easily worn mask of the professional politician, and one could see at a glance that for years he had scavenged the Forum and the Senate, and the wards as well. Here he was now, the last step before he became a beggar with only a mat in some Roman lodging-house. Yet his voice rolled out with the robust quackery of a barker at a fair. These were the fortunes of war, as he made plain to them. Some chose the right party with uncanny facility. He had always chosen the wrong one, and it was no use saying that essentially they were both the same. This is where it brought him, but better men fared less well. "You will forgive me for not rising, my gentle sir and my gentle ladies, but the heart. He put his hand on the great paunch in the general area. "I see you are out early, and early you should be out, since that is the time for travel. Capua?" "Capua," said Caius. "Capua indeed, a lovely city, a beautiful city, a fair city, a veritable gem of a city. To visit relatives, no doubt?" "No doubt," answered Caius. The girls were smiling. He was amiable. He was a great clown. His dignity slipped away. Better to be a clown for these young people. Caius realized that there was a money involved somewhere in these proceedings, but he didn't mind. For one thing, he had never been denied money sufficient for all his needs or whims, and for another, he desired to impress the girls with his worldliness, and how better than through this worldly fat clown of a man? "You see me a guide, a storyteller, a small purveyor of bits of punishment and justice. Yet does a judge do more? The station is different. Yet better to accept a denarius and the shame that goes with it than to beg." The girls couldn't keep their eyes from the dead man who hung from the crucifix. He was directly above them now, and they kept darting glances at his naked, sun-blackened, and bird-torn body. The crows swooped around him tentatively. The flies crawled on his skin. As he hung, his body leaning out and away from the cross, he seemed always to be falling, always in motion, a grotesque motion of the dead. His head hung forward, and his long, sandy hair covered what horror might have been in his face. Caius gave the fat man a coin. The thanks was no more than what was due. The bearers squatted silently, never glancing at the crucifix, eyes on the ground. Road-broken they were, and well-trained. "This one is symbolic, so as to speak," said the fat man. "Mistress mine, do not regard it as human or horrible. Rome gives and Rome takes, and more or less. The punishment fits the crime. This one stands alone and calls your attention to what will follow. Between here and Capua, do you know how many?" They knew, but they waited for him to say it. There was a precision about this fat, jovial man who introduced them to what was unspeakable. He was proof that it was not unspeakable, but ordinary and natural. He would give them an exact figure. It might not be right, but it would be precise. 6,472, he said. A few of the litter-bearers stirred. They were not resting. They were rigid. If anyone had regarded them, they would have noticed that. But no one regarded them. 6,472, the fat man repeated. Caius made the right remark. "That much timber," Caius said. Helena knew it was a fraud, but the fat man nodded appreciatively. Now they were in rapport. The fat man extracted a cane from the folds of his gown and gestured at the crucifix. "That one merely a token of a token, so as to speak." Claudia giggled nervously. "Nevertheless of interest and of importance. Set apart with reason. Reason is Rome, and Rome is reasonable." He was fond of maxims. "Is that Spartacus?" Claudia asked foolishly, but the fat man found patience for her. The way he licked his lips proved that his paternal attitude was not unmixed with emotion, and Caius thought, "The lecherous old beast." "Hardly Spartacus, my dear." "His body was never found," Caius said impatiently. "Cut to pieces," the fat man said pompously. "Cut to pieces, my dear child. Tender minds for such dreadful thoughts. But that's the truth of it." Claudia shuddered, but deliciously, and Caius saw a light in her eyes he had never noticed before. Beware of superficial judgments, his father had once said to him, and while his father had weightier matters in mind than estimation of women, it held. Claudia had never looked at him as she had looked at the fat man now, and he continued, "The simple truth of it? And now they say Spartacus never existed. Ha! Do I exist? Do you exist? Are there or are there not 6,472 corpses hanging from crucifixes between here and Capua along the Appian Way? Are there or are there not? There are indeed. And let me ask you another question, my young folk. Why so many? A token of punishment is a token of punishment. But why 6,472? The dogs deserved it, Helena answered quietly. Did they? The fat man raised a sophisticated brow. He was a man of the world, he made plain to them. And if they were higher in station, they were younger enough in years to be impressed. Perhaps they did. But why butcher so much meat if one can't eat it? I'll tell you, keeps the price up, stabilizes things, and most of all, decides some very delicate questions of ownership. There you have the answer in a nutshell. Now this one here, gesturing with his cane, have a good look at him. Fair tracks, the Gaul. Most important, most important. A close man to Spartacus, yes indeed, and I watched him die. Sitting right here, I watched him die. It took 4 days, strong as an ox. My, oh my, you would never believe such strength, never believe it at all. I have my chair here from Sextus, of the 3rd Ward. You know him? A gentleman, a very great gentleman, and well disposed toward me. You'd be surprised how many people came out to watch, and it was something well worth watching. Not that I could charge them a proper fee, but people give if you give them something in return. Fair measure for fair measure. I took trouble to inform myself. You'd be surprised what profound ignorance there is here and thereabout concerning the wars of Spartacus. Now see here, this young lady, she asks me, is that one Spartacus? A natural question, but wouldn't it be exceedingly unnatural if it was so? You gentle ones live a sheltered life, very sheltered. Otherwise the young lady would have known that Spartacus was cut up so that no hair nor hide of him was ever found. Quite different with this one. He was taken, cut up a little, true. See here. With his cane he traced a long scar on the side of the body above him. Number of scars, and most interesting, side or front, none in the back. You wouldn't want to stress such detail for the rabble, but I can tell you, as a matter of fact, the litter-bearers were watching him now and listening, their eyes gleaming out of their long matted hair, that these were the best soldiers that ever walked on Italian soil. Bears thinking about something like that. Come back to our friend up here. Took 4 days for him to die, and it would have taken a good deal longer if he hadn't opened a vein and bled him a bit. Now you may not know that, but you gotta do it when you put them on the cross. Either you bleed them or they swell up like a bloater, and if you bleed them properly, then they dry properly, and they can hang up there for maybe a month, with no more offense than a little bit of smell. Just like curing a piece of meat, and you want plenty of sunshine to help it along. Now this was a fierce one, all right, defiant, proud, but he lost it. First day he hung up there and cursed out every decent citizen who came along to watch. Frightful, foul language. You wouldn't want any ladies around to hear such language. Comes of no breeding, and a slave is a slave, but I will bore him no ill will. Here I was, and here he was, and now and then I'd say to him, your misfortune is my fortune, and while yours may not be the most comfortable way to die, mine is by no means the most comfortable way to earn a living. And precious little I'll earn. You keep up that kind of talk. Didn't seem to move him much, one way or another. But toward the evening of the 2nd day he clammed up, tight as a trap. Do you know what was the last thing he said? What? Whispered Claudia. I will return and I will be millions. Just that. Fanciful, isn't it? What did he mean? Caius wondered, in spite of himself. The fat man had woven a spell over him. Now what did he mean, young sir? I have no more idea than you have, and he never spoke again either. I poked him up a little the next day, but he never said a word. Just looked at me out of those bloodshot eyes of his, looked at me like he could kill me. But he wasn't for killing anything else. So you see, my dear, addressing Claudia again, he wasn't Spartacus, but was one of his lieutenants and a hard man, close to Spartacus, but not so hard. That was a hard one, was Spartacus. You would not like to meet him along the high road, and never will neither, for he's dead and rotting. Now, what else would you like to know? I think we've heard enough. Caius said, regretting the denarius now. We must be on our way. Chapter 3. In those days, Rome was like a heart which pumped its blood along the Roman roads to every corner of the world. Another nation would live 1,000 years and build one third-rate road which perhaps connected its major cities. With Rome it was different. "Build us a road," said the Senate. They had the skill. The engineers plotted it, contracts were handed out, and the construction men took it under way. Then the labor gangs built the road like an arrow to wherever it had to go. If a mountain stood in the way, you got rid of the mountain. If there was a deep valley, you flung a bridge across the valley. If there was a river, you bridged the river. Nothing halted Rome, and nothing halted the Roman road. This high road upon which these 3 light-hearted young people were traveling south from Rome to Capua was called the Appian Way. It was a well-built, broad road of alternate layers of volcanic ash and gravel, and surfaced with stone. It was made to last. When the Romans put down a road, they laid it not for this year or the next, but for centuries. That was how the Appian Way was laid down. It was a symbol of the progress of mankind, the productivity of Rome, and the enduring capacity of the Roman people for organization. It stated quite clearly that the Roman system was the best system mankind had ever devised, a system of order and justice and intelligence. The evidence of intelligence and order was everywhere, and the people who traveled the road took it so much for granted that it hardly registered upon their minds. For example, distance was specified, not estimated. Every mile of the way was marked by a milestone. Each milestone gave the pertinent information a traveler needed to know. You knew at any point precisely how far you were from Rome, from Formiae, from Capua. Every 5 miles, there was a public house and stables, where one could find horses, refreshments, and, if necessary, shelter for the night. Many of the public houses were quite magnificent, with broad verandas where drinks and food were served. Some had baths, where weary travelers could refresh themselves, and others had good, comfortable sleeping quarters. The newer public houses were built in the style of the Greek temples, and they added to the natural beauty of the scenery along the way. Where the ground was flat, marsh, or plain, the road was terraced, with the right-of-way rising 10 or 15 feet above the surrounding countryside. Where the ground was broken or hilly, the roads either cut its way through or crossed gorges on stone arches. The road proclaimed stability, and over the surface of the road flowed all the elements of Roman stability. Marching on the road, soldiers could do 30 miles in a single day, and repeat the same 30 miles day after day. Baggage trains flowed along the roads, loaded with the goods of the Republic, wheat and barley and pig iron and cut lumber, and linen and wool and oil and fruit and cheese and smoked meat. On the road were citizens engaged in the legitimate business of the citizens, genteel folk going to and from their country places, commercial travelers and pleasure travelers, slave caravans going to and from the market, people of every land and every nation, all of them tasting the firmness and the orderliness of Rome's rule. And at this time, alongside the road, a crucifix was planted every few feet, and on every crucifix, a dead man hung. Chapter 4. The morning turned out to be warmer than Caius had expected it to be, and after a while the smell of the dead became quite unpleasant. The girls soaked their handkerchiefs with perfume and sniffed constantly, but that could not shut out the sudden waves of sweet and sickening smell which floated across the road, nor could it prevent a reaction to the smell. The girls were sick, and Caius finally had to drop behind and go to the side of the road and relieve himself. It almost spoiled the morning. Fortunately, there were no crucifixes within half a mile of the public house where they had stopped to lunch, and though they had little appetite left now, they were able to get over their sickness. This wayside inn was built in the Greek style, a rambling one-story building with a pleasant veranda. The veranda, which was set out with tables, was built over a little gully through which ran a brook, and the grotto it faced upon was surrounded by banks of green and fragrant pine. There was no other smell here but the pine smell, the wet, sweet smell of the woods, and no sound except the polite hum of conversation from the diners and the music of the brook. "What an utterly delightful place," Claudia said, and Caius, who had stopped here before, found a table for them and began to order lunch with great authority. The wine of the house, a sparkling amber drink, dry and refreshing, was set before them immediately, and as they sipped it, their appetite returned. They were at the back of the house, separated from the common room in front where soldiers and draymen and foreigners ate. Here it was cool and shaded, and while the issue was rarely pressed, it was recognized that only knights and patricians were served here. that made it far from exclusive. For many knights were commercial travelers, businessmen and manufacturers and commission merchants and slave dealers, but it was a public house and not a private villa. Also of late, the knights were aping the manners of the patricians and becoming less loud and obtrusive and unpleasant. Caius ordered cold-pressed smoked duck and glazed oranges, and until the food came he made conversation about the latest play to open in Rome, a rather contrived comedy in poor imitation of the Greek, as so many were. The plot concerned an ugly and vulgar woman who made a pact with the gods to deliver them, in return for a day of grace and beauty, her husband's heart. The husband had been sleeping with the mistress of one of the gods, and the intricate and shoddy plot was based on the thin motivation of revenge. At least that was Helena's feeling. But Caius protested that in spite of its superficiality, he thought it had many clever moments. "I liked it," Claudia said simply. "I think we are too concerned with what a thing says instead of the way it says it." Caius smiled. "For my part, I go to the theater to be amused with what is clever. If one wants the drama of life and death, one can go to the arena and watch the gladiators cut each other up. I've noticed, however, that it isn't the particularly brilliant or profound type who frequents the games." "You're excusing bad writing," Helena protested. "Not at all. I just don't think the quality of writing in the theater is of any great importance. It's cheaper to hire a Greek writer than a litter-bearer. And I'm not one of those who make a cult of the Greeks." As he said this last, Caius became conscious of a man standing alongside the table. The other tables had filled up, and this particular man, a commercial traveler of some sort, wondered whether he might not join them. "Just a bite and I'll be going," he said, "if you don't mind the intrusion." He was a tall, well-fleshed, well-set-up man, obviously prosperous, his clothes expensive, and not deferential except to the obvious family and rank of these young people. In the old times, the knights had not had this attitude toward the landed nobility. It was only when they became very wealthy as a class that they discovered ancestry to be one of the most difficult commodities to purchase, and thereby its value increased. Caius, like so many of his friends, often remarked on the contradiction between the loud democratic sentiments of these people and their intense class aspirations. "My name is Gaius Marcus Senvius," said the knight. "Don't hesitate to refuse me." "Please sit down," Helena answered. Caius introduced himself and the girls, and he was pleased at the other's reaction. "I've had some dealings with some of your family," the knight remarked. "Dealings?" "Dealings in cattle, that is. I'm a sausage maker. I've a plant in Rome and another in Terracina, where I'm coming from now. If you've eaten sausage, you've eaten my sausage." "I'm sure," Caius smiled, thinking. "He hates my guts. Look at him. Now he hates my guts, but he's still pleased to sit here. What swine they are," said Senvius, as if he had read the other's mind. "We are very pleased to meet you, and will carry back to our father your kindest wishes," said Helena gently. She smiled sweetly at Senvius, and he looked at her newly, as if to say, "So you are a woman, my dear, patrician or no." That was how Caius read it. "How would you like to go to bed with me, you little bitch?" They smiled at each other, and then Caius could have killed him, but hated his sister more. "I didn't mean to interrupt your conversation," Senvius said. "Please go on with it." "We were talking tedious talk about a tedious play. The food came then, and they began to eat. Suddenly Claudia halted a piece of duck halfway to her mouth, and said what Caius afterwards considered a most astonishing thing. "You must have been so disturbed by the tokens." "Tokens?" "The crucifixion." "Disturbed?" "By a waste of so much fresh meat," said Claudia calmly, not cleverly at all, but just calmly, and then went on eating her duck. Caius had to fix his face to keep from bursting out with laughter, and Senvius went red and then white. But Claudia, not knowing at all what she had done, just went on eating. Only Helena sensed something harder than ordinary in the sausage maker, and her skin prickled in anticipation. She wanted him to hit back, and was pleased when he did. "Disturbed isn't the word," Senvius said finally. "I don't like waste." "Waste?" asked Claudia, breaking the glazed orange in little pieces and placing each little piece so delicately between her lips. "Waste?" Claudia drew pity from some men and anger from a few. It took an extraordinary man to see beyond that. "They were all set up, those men of Spartacus," explained Marcus Senvius. "And well fed too. Suppose they avenged a weight of 150 pounds each. There are more than 6,000 of them mounted out there like stuffed birds. That's 900,000 pounds of fresh meat. Or it was fresh at any rate. Oh no, he can't mean it, thought Helena, her whole body prickled with expectation now. But Claudia, who went on eating the glazed orange, knew that he did mean it, and Caius asked, "Why didn't you make an offer?" "I did." "But they wouldn't sell?" "I managed to buy 250,000 pounds. What he is up to, Caius wondered, and thought, he's trying to shock us. In his vulgar, filthy way, he's going to pay us back for what Claudia said. Helena, however, saw the substance of the truth, and Caius had the satisfaction of knowing that something had finally gotten under her skin. "Of men?" whispered Claudia. "Of tools," said the sausage-maker precisely, to quote that admirable young philosopher, Cicero. "Worthless tools. I smoked them, minced them, and mixed them with pork, spice, and salt. Half goes to Gaul, half to Egypt, and the price is just right." "I think your humor is ill-taken," Caius muttered. He was very young, and he found it hard to stand up to the mature bitterness of the sausage-maker. The knight would never in all his day forget Claudia's insult, and he would always hold it against Caius because Caius had made the error of being present. "I am not trying to be humorous," Senvius said matter-of-factly. "The young lady asked a question, and I answered it. I bought 250,000 pounds of slave to be turned into sausage." "That's the most frightful and disgusting thing I've ever heard," said Helena. "Your natural boorishness, sir, has taken an odd turn." The knight rose and looked from one to another. "Pardon me," he said, and to Caius, "ask your uncle Silius. He handled the transaction, and he made a nice little bit for himself in doing it." Then he moved away. Claudia went on eating the glazed orange calmly, only stopping to remark, "What an impossible person he turned out to be." "Nevertheless, he was telling the truth," Helena said. "What? Of course he was. Why would you be so shocked?" "It was a stupid lie," said Caius, "created solely for our benefit." "The difference between us, my dear," said Helena, "is that I know when someone is telling the truth." Claudia became whiter than usual. She rose, excused herself, and then moved with stately dignity toward the rest-room. Helena smiled a little, almost to herself, and Caius said, "Nothing shocks you really, does it, Helena?" "Why should it?" "At least I will never eat sausage again." "I never ate it," said Helena.